Welcome, everyone. I'm glad to see you here today. Today, we will be discussing a very important topic, doubts about Quran. This is the first slide, serving as our cover, so I just want to briefly introduce what we'll explore. We'll look into common questions and concerns people have regarding the Quran. And of course, we'll also discuss clarifications and insights to better understand this sacred text. Let's get started. Let's now look at some of the doubts that have existed from the Prophet's era until today regarding the Quran. Disbelievers have often tried to challenge the divine origin of the Quran by raising various allegations. One of the most common claims is that the Quran is actually the work of Prophet Muhammad himself, rather than the words of Allah. They suggest that he deceived his followers into believing it was divine revelation. Some even argue that he had good intentions, influenced by his high moral character, but that he was experiencing delusions or hallucinations, which led him to produce the words of the Quran. However, this claim can be easily refuted with historical evidence. There is no record or credible indication that Prophet Muhammad suffered from hallucinations or mental health issues. Furthermore, the Quran's remarkable style and clarity make it impossible to attribute it to someone suffering from hallucinations. Typically, individuals with such issues tend to produce incoherent or unintelligible statements, not something as eloquent and structured as the Quran. Another harsh accusation is that Prophet Muhammad deceived his followers to gain power. But if that were true, he would have simply claimed the Quran was his own creation and sought to establish himself as a ruler. Interestingly, even the disbelieving Arabs recognized the Quran's superiority over poetry and other literature. If his goal was merely to rule, he could have taken credit for the Quran, but instead, he rejected any such desire for leadership when offered in exchange for abandoning his mission. In summary, these doubts and accusations are not supported by historical facts or the nature of the Quran itself. They serve as attempts to undermine the divine message, but the evidence strongly affirms the Quran's divine origin. Let's explore some important points about the Prophet and the Quran. First, it's impossible for the Prophet to have claimed that the Quran was his own statement to give it a divine origin. The key reason is that he distinctly differentiated the Quran from his own words. If he wanted to present his words as divine, he wouldn't have made that clear distinction. This separation shows that the Quran is not simply his personal statements. Next, despite gaining popularity, power, and wealth through his call to Islam, the Prophet died leaving behind a significant amount of wealth for his family. But what's remarkable is that he was known even before his prophethood as a trustworthy and truthful person, and he continued to uphold these qualities. The wealth he earned didn't change his character. He used it generously to help those in need. He died as a noble ruler, loved by his companions because of his generosity. Finally, consider that the Quran even mentions times when the Prophet was reprimanded for mistakes he made, like in Surah Abasa, where he frowned at a companion. If the Prophet's goal was fame or power, why would these mistakes be included in the Quran? It's a strong indication that the Quran is not just his words, but something divine. These points all help us understand the divine nature of the Quran and the true character of the Prophet. Some disbelievers argue that the Prophet learned the Quran from Christians or Jews he met during his lifetime. But is that really plausible? Let's examine this claim. He did meet a monk known as Buhaira when he was about 9 years old. However, this meeting was brief. Buhaira only mentioned that the Prophet would become a prophet and advised his uncle to send him back to Mecca, warning that the Jews might harm him if they recognized him. So, the Prophet's return to Mecca was based on this guidance, not on any learning from Buhaira. Later, he also met Waraka ibn Nawfal after the first verses of Surah Al-Alaq were revealed. Waraka, who was knowledgeable about the Torah and Gospels, told the Prophet that he would soon be sent as a prophet. But Waraka died shortly after this encounter. Now, consider this. How could the entire Quran be taught to someone who was unlettered, through just one meeting with Buhaira and Waraka? It doesn't make sense. These brief encounters could not have provided the comprehensive knowledge necessary for the Quran. As for the Jews and Christians he encountered later in Madinah, they were actually trying to disprove his message. They asked questions that they knew he couldn't answer to undermine him. But Allah revealed answers to these questions, demonstrating the truth of his prophethood. Despite this, very few believed afterward. Many remained opposed. So how could they have taught him the Quran? The answer is clear. These claims don't hold up against the evidence. This all ties back to our theme, the Quran's divine origin and the prophet's unlettered status. These points show that the idea of him learning from others simply isn't credible. Today, I want to highlight how stories from the Quran about the people of old have been uncovered in many books around the world. These stories are found across different languages, which is quite significant. It shows that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did not simply learn these stories from existing texts. In fact, he could barely read his own language, let alone access books in other languages. This fact is crucial because it points to the divine origin of the Quran. These discoveries support the idea that the message of the Quran is truly from God, not something learned or copied from human sources. They reinforce the belief that the prophet's knowledge came through divine revelation, beyond human capability or influence. So these findings serve as powerful evidence, demonstrating that the Quran's message is authentic and divine, strengthening our faith and understanding of its divine origin. The revelation of the Quran happened in two main ways, and today I'll focus on the first way. So, in this method, the Quran was sent down all at once, in a single night. This night is known as Layla al-Qadr, or the Night of Decree, and it occurs during one of the last 10 nights of Ramadan, which are considered especially blessed. Initially, the Quran was in al-Law al-Mahfud, the protected tablet, which is a divine record. From there, it was sent down to a special station in the lowest heaven called Beit al-Izza, or the House of Power. This process of revelation is significant because it highlights the divine origin and the powerful, deliberate manner in which the Quran was conveyed. The key verses about this form of revelation are found in Surah Al-Qadr and Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 185. Understanding this method reminds us of the profound and miraculous nature of the Quran's arrival to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, reinforcing its importance in our faith and devotion. The second way of revelation began with the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad and lasted for 23 years. During this period, portions of the Quran were revealed to the prophet whenever needed, which allowed the message to unfold gradually. The very first portion revealed in this manner was the initial 5 verses of Surah Al-Alaq. Interestingly, the first complete surah revealed was Surah Al-Fatiha, which holds a central place in the Quran. Ibn Abbas, a renowned scholar, believed that the last ayah revealed was verse 281 of Surah Al-Baqarah, and the final surah was Surah An-Nasr. This highlights how the revelation was a continuous, ongoing process, rather than a single event. This method of revelation is often referred to in the Quran itself, specifically in Surah Al-Isra, verse 106. It's commonly known as the segmented revelation because the revelations came in parts, piece by piece, over many years. Understanding this helps us appreciate the gradual and deliberate way the Quranic message was conveyed, which aligns with the overall theme of divine guidance unfolding over time.